Hi folks, welcome to the Prepared Homestead. This is Travis. Thank you all for stopping by to watch. Looks like we've got another pretty warm day. Not exceedingly warm, but humidity's really high. Like 80% humidity today. There's a chance of rain this afternoon. It looks like there's going to be a chance of rain just about every day this week. It doesn't look like anything's a washout. I think it's just the humidity and some showers here and there that keeps the humidity up. It's that time of the year. The whole Texas flooding situation just seems to get worse with every news report. They're now saying there's been over 50 confirmed lives lost. There's still dozens missing. Many of them are children from the Christian youth camp that was down there, as many of you know. They did find the camp director among the ones that perished. And from a loss of life standpoint, this is a true tragedy. This is a very, very sad event. And I hope that you are, remembering those families in prayer. Definitely the ones that lost lives in their families, but just the damage that's happened. A lot of things going on there with just the destruction of the flooding. There's really no force of nature on the planet that's stronger and more destructive than flooding. A lot of people don't realize that. They think of hurricanes and winds and earthquakes and all that kind of stuff, tornadoes, but flooding is an unstoppable force, and it just does so much mass destruction. So remember that, and remember, for like I said yesterday, your own preparedness plans needs to include stuff like this. What are you going to do? What are you going to do if something like this happens and there's people missing? Our team here locally, we've been actually, coincidentally, I guess, been putting a lot of focus on search and rescue. The last month or so, we've done several trainings. I'm planning another one. In fact, I was talking to one of my guys yesterday that's kind of helping with that, and we're planning another search and rescue training event. So it's something to be considering, not just the preparations for these types of events for you personally or within your community, but then the aftermath. How do you go look for people like this, especially under these conditions? The floodwater still could be high. It could be raining. I've done search and rescue and water rescue things when in the midst of the storm. When there's lives involved, you're not waiting until the storm ends and the water recedes. If there's a potential for people that are missing that are still alive, you got to go out then. And so how do you do that? Do you have the equipment to go out and try to find people? And I know that many of you say, well, we leave that to the professionals. I get that, but there's a couple of things to think of. What if you live in an area where there's no professionals that can do that? What if the system that you call in the professionals is down? You can't always rely on whether it's government or outside sources for your survival. If it's your neighbors, your own family that gets swept away and you have to go look for them and try to rescue them, I'm not advising that everyone just go out there and jump in the water. That's why I'm saying you need to train for it. Get the proper training, develop those skills, get the proper equipment. It's something to think about. I know it's not for everyone, but it's something to think about because it can be a major tragedy. I wanted to talk about something that I guess may not necessarily be, in the front of your thoughts when it comes to preparedness right now, based on all the stuff that's going on. Right now it seems to be the big story is Elon Musk's new political party that he's creating and all that kind of stuff. And I honestly, I don't know that I could care less about it. But I wanted to talk to you today about EMPs, electromagnetic pulses, and some ideas on preparations for it, and it's not because I think that it is imminent. I think it's, becoming more and more likely. I've said for years, especially from a perspective of China, if I was China, and when you look at what China, if you do the research on what their real goals are, and you can go back a decade or two, And you can find documentation, speeches made where they want to take over, or at least kind of be the ruling party body over America. They want to be the dominant force over America. I don't think they want America to be destroyed. I don't think it's like, past wars where they want to just come in and destroy America. They just want to be a dominant force over America. And I'm telling you, one of the best ways in warfare nowadays that's not being used, because it's like a major line that would be crossed if it were used, is an electromagnetic pulse. It's possibly also because it's so untested that no one truly knows the extent of the damage of how an electromagnetic pulse would happen. But in theory, you could knock out the grid of America, bring America down to its knees, and even potentially cause a lot of death of American citizens, and set back for a while and then move in and very easily take over America, because we would be in such a weakened state. And yet all the infrastructure is still standing. You haven't damaged infrastructure. You haven't damaged a lot of things. You'd have to maybe replace electronic components, but where do all those electronic components come from? Yeah, overseas, China. So I've said for years that I think that that's a more likely scenario if they really, really wanted to take us over than just dropping nukes on us. And in fact, just last week in the news, China announced that they have developed a new type of EMP weapon. This is a non-nuclear weapon. This isn't something that's going to take out grids for, statewide, region-wide, all this kind of stuff. This is a small EMP that's capable of taking out substations. Think of, where pretty much all of you live. There are places where there's substations, where all the grid kind of comes in and the big transformers and all that kind of stuff are at. This is something that could take that out. And so if it takes that out, cooks all that stuff, fries it, makes it unusable, then all the electric lines that substation, feeds, they're dead, right? Could it be rebuilt? Yes, but it's going to take time. Remember, most of your transformers, things like that, come from China. And in the last couple of years, I've had several conversations with people. And in fact, just the other day, had another conversation with someone that works in, as a lineman or in that kind of field. And they said that, again, talked about how we are so hyper dependent upon China when it comes to our grid, for the components for our grid. And that puts us in a very weakened state. So anyways, what do we do? Well, number one, you kind of have to have a little bit of understanding. The thing is that EMP is in a lot of ways kind of a theoretical thing. Yes, they have happened. Back in the 50s and 60s, when the United States and Russia was doing a lot of nuclear testing, there was also some EMP testing, and some of it was successful. There's a whole lot of debate. I suspect that there'll be a lot of debate in the comments on this, that it is capable, it's fake, it's bigger than you think, that they're unstoppable, they're not as bad as you think, all this kind of stuff. Based on official documentation, some of them can, really cause a huge meltdown of the grid and of electrical components. Others may just be able to kind of knock things down for a while. Just this past year, in Europe, there have been, over in Spain, France, places like that, you guys know of, where at one point the communication system went down, and another point the grid went down for a few days. Now, I'm not saying that those were directly related to EMPs. The official story is it was solar, which an EMP is basically a man-made solar event. And so we saw that those systems went down for a few days, and then they were able to bring them back up with some repair. If that is true, that's what's happened. That's another example of what an EMP could be like. And so when you're preparing for it, understand that I would guess the most likely scenario is not a complete meltdown of everything. The grid, the electric lines, the computer components, electronic components. While that's certainly a possibility, I doubt that would be considered a strong possibility. When you're looking at the relationship with us and China, and that even now under the Trump administration, China is making very serious threats. And then just this morning, we announced, it was announced in the news that we are sending more missile defense systems to Taiwan. And China has said repeatedly, even to the Trump administration, do not do that. You are crossing lines. So the increased chance of that is there. And then, of course, you know, what's going on in the Middle East. Could a small device be detonated, or one of these new non-nuclear EMP devices be used? Yeah, it's possible. So I think it's a good idea to have some plan, right? I think at minimum, remember, I'm speaking of minimums. At minimum, you need to have a plan to be pretty much off-grid, in the dark, primitive, for at least 2 weeks. Which means, you know, what are you going to do with water? Do you have enough water or water supply for 2 weeks? A way to purify the water, sanitation, to heat your home if it's in the middle of wintertime, to cook food if that's necessary, to be able to hunker down for a minimum of 2 weeks. That's minimum. That's minimum. You know, definitely an EMP could be a long-lasting event, but at minimum 2 weeks. Certain things, and this is going to vary from person to person. Maybe you have something in your life that you are dependent upon electrical equipment. Maybe it's a medical device. You know, do you have a backup for that? Do you have that backup in something like a Faraday cage? If you don't know what that is, you should do some more research. That is a box or container that is made in such a way that it will protect from an EMP. They can be made, they can be purchased. You know, you can bury a device underground under so many inches of soil to protect it. And so if you're dependent upon a medical device, you should be doing some research of how you can have a backup to that is protected from an EMP. It may not be cheap, but it may not be expensive either, depending on what you're trying to work for. Communications is something else. You know, small handheld radios, like, you know, this one here, one of these ones that I keep. I actually have a few in here. The thing is who you're going to communicate with. That should be your first question. You know, are you part of a team? You have a little mag, community. So you need to know who you're going to be communicating with. If not, you need to be aware of emergency frequencies. There are nationwide emergency frequencies. There sometimes are regional emergency frequencies. Have those programmed in. Maybe there's regional repeaters. There's no guarantee those repeaters would function after an EMP, but it's possible. So it wouldn't hurt to have those programmed into the radio. The radio needs to be protected, either in a Faraday cage or buried. Ability to charge it. You know, you can buy small solar powered charging devices, not too expensive. And this is where I do think those little battery packed, they call them generators, but they're battery, you know, electric holding facility, you know, devices, with a solar panel could come in play, where you can recharge small devices. That all is something that you should be thinking about. As far as vehicle, I know they make EMP devices on vehicles. Personally, the jury's still out on whether those really would actually work. You know, they've never really been tested. It's all theory. The best that I have seen in those, and I'm sure I think they're EMP Shield or something like that. They reached out to me one time, wanted to sponsor my show and promote their items. I think the big thing that I've noticed with those is they need to be grounded. If you have one, those things are based on military technology that they use in certain military vehicles to protect military vehicles. But the thing is in most of those military vehicles, if you've ever noticed, they have chains that can be dropped so that they touch the ground, and that grounds them. And so if you have one of those in your vehicle, it's very possible that they would be ineffective if you don't have something grounding that vehicle, that device, to the actual ground. I'm not the electrical engineer. This is based on research from actual electrical engineers. As far as other things, you need to be, this is just preparedness like normal. You know, food supplies, medical supplies, defense supplies. If it was something on a small scale that lasted a few days, for instance, like what we saw over in Europe, that was a regional thing that only lasted a few days, I think mostly things would be okay. You're just going to be hunkered down in the dark for a while, but of course you don't know that it's going to last a few days. If it lasts weeks, the longer it lasts, the longer the recovery is going to be. So if if the grid went down for 2 weeks, it's not going to just pop back up the next day. And things aren't going to just be normal, 2 weeks plus 1 day. It's going to take a few weeks to get things back to normal, if they ever return back to normal, with supply chains and stuff like that. So understand that, if something like this happens, the downtime period could be much longer than just the grid being down. Now, if this is a permanent thing or a very long term where it really fries things, that's when you get into apocalyptic levels. Several years ago, a study was done, was promoted through the U.S. government, that if an EMP or a CME, which is a solar event, happened to where it knocked the entire U.S. grid down, that within 1 year there could be up to 90% casualties here in the United States, because so many people are dependent upon that. And then it just kind of starts to compound, where you've got mass death and you've got disease and you've got the shutdown of the system. It's crazy. So yes, on the worst case scenario, a major EMP attack could bring the population, down 90% within 1 year. And while I don't think that's the most likely scenario, I think it is something that you should plan for as best as possible. Because while an EMP may not be on the top of the list right now, and it may not ever happen, I think as tensions rise and this push for dominance in AI, dominance in technology, an EMP is becoming a more likely thing. It would be easier. I think probably one of the things that seems to hold them back is that it's still a very uncertain thing. There's studies that indicate a large EMP would be uncontrollable and could not just knock out the American grid, but could knock out, cross oceans and all this kind of stuff, depending on the height and the horizon. And I'm not going to go into all the science behind that. You can research that yourself. But I think that may be one of the reasons why it's not used a lot, is because there's just so much uncertainty. And maybe that's why China is focusing on the smaller, more localized EMPs. Although, according to American Pentagon research, they believe that China is capable of a super EMPs that could just melt the entire American grid and all of the electrical components of it. So, these things they're all over the board when it comes to EMPs. I get it. It seems overwhelming. This seems to be, a very worst case scenario, and how can the average person plan and prepare for it? I think, again, it's like many other things. Build yourself to a level that you are self-sufficient, that while things may not be easy and good and what you like, you are capable of surviving completely on your own, or at least with a small group of trusted people. Food, development, growing, preserving it, medical, producing your own medicines as much as possible, water, your own water source, ability to purify it, defense, coming to each other's aid, all those things. It may be a more primitive way of doing it, but at least you're able to survive. I think that's probably the best fallback scenario that you could come up with. And then, like I said, at least a 2-week ability to just be completely dark, primitive, whatever, because I think that's the more likely scenario, doing the research I've done. It doesn't mean that it won't go longer. I think that's just the more likely. This is something I think everyone should be researching. What are you going to do about, electronic files? Do you have paper backups of all your bank accounts, your money, your investments, your retirements? Will that help? Who knows? But it doesn't hurt to have it. Do you have ways to communicate with people? That's going to be a big one. If they live far away, the communications just may not happen. Medical, that's another big one. Sanitation, that's a big one. A lot of people die of disease. Our bodies are not as immune resistant as they once were. 200 years ago, you could drink out of a creek and be fine for the most part. Nowadays, most people couldn't do that. These are things that you should be thinking about. And then how to protect this stuff, how to build Faraday cages or buy the stuff or to learn to bury it. I don't think a person should go crazy on it and become obsessed with it, but I think that it does make sense to have at least some things protected for a just in case. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. My focus isn't so much on protecting everything electronic. Some things, my focus is how to just live without it. Because if I can do that, then I can survive just about anything. I think it's something that we should all be thinking about. Like I said, considering the few little things in the news, stuff over in Europe, the news that China has a new EMP weapon, the tensions between us and China, us sending Taiwan more weapons, all that kind of stuff. Maybe you should be thinking about it more and doing a little bit more research because, in the day of AI and technology, this may be one of the things that they might use to knock it all down. Folks, it's time to get your houses in order and to prepare yourselves mentally, physically, and spiritually. Thanks for watching. Catch you in the next video.